It is great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity of speaking to you for a few minutes. My name is Don Albrecht. I'm the director of the Western Rural Development Center. My office is at Utah State University, but I cover the 13 western states. And speaking of rural communities, the last 2 weeks I was thinking about it. I've been in Douglas, Arizona, Safford, Arizona, Morenci, Arizona, Kanab, Utah, Beaver, Utah, Silton, Parachute, Colorado, and Madison County, Idaho. So I don't spend a whole lot of time in my office. I spend a whole lot of time. Where do I? Okay. My office is one of 4 regional rural development centers. I cover the West. There's another one that covers the Midwest, the South, and the Northeast. Between the 4 of us, we cover all 50 states. My job, to put it simple, is to enhance the community development for the residents and the communities of the rural West. And so I spend a lot of time in these communities talking to rural people. The message I have is similar to what we heard earlier. And that is, number one, the economy is changing and changing rapidly. And the changes that we're seeing are having a more significant impact on rural America than urban America. So first of all, a big change is the skills required in the modern economy are very different than they used to be. The bottom line there is the number of jobs for people with a high school degree or less. We lost many of these at the beginning of the recession and they never came back. The number of jobs available for people with a high school degree and less is millions fewer than it used to be. The middle line is people with a associate degree or some kind of training and skill beyond high school. The blue line is people with at least a bachelor's degree. The number of jobs for these individuals is going up and continues to increase. So not only the skills required, but the type of jobs available is changing. We've been talking about this all day. This is logging, and this is in my 13 western states. The number of jobs in logging is about 1/3 of what it was in 1990 in the 13 western states. We've lost 2/3 of the logging jobs. And as has been mentioned, the primary driver of this is technology, that one person can produce a whole lot more timber than they used to. In the last century, the number of hours in agricultural production is about 1/10 of what it was a century ago. And we produce vastly more than we did then. Again, machinery technology is one farmer can produce far more than 100 farmers could in the past. And coal mining. There's 1/10 as many coal miners as there were a century ago. And again, these people can produce more coal than we did in the past. I've been in coal mines and timber fields and everything, and you watch the modern technology, and you need an individual with high skills to run the machines they're doing these kinds of things. And manufacturing. Since 1979, when manufacturing employment reached a peak in the U.S., we've lost 7 million manufacturing jobs. We've gone from 19 million to 12 million roughly. But despite this, manufacturing production has doubled. Okay. And these trends are going to continue. A story I often remember is I was in a small town in Idaho. The county commissioner said to me, in 1962 we had 9 sawmills, now we have 1. If you help us bring back the other 8 sawmills, our problems are solved. Well, the thing is, those 8 sawmills are not coming back. And so what are we going to do to rebuild the rural economy? As has been talked about, technology has been the major source of the change in the rural economy. That's where the jobs have gone, as they've been replaced by, human labor has been replaced by machines. we need to look to technology to help solve the problem that we're dealing with. And we've talked about this already today. What technology does is allow you to live anywhere in the rural West as long as there's decent broadband, and that is a big issue. And you can sell market your products and your skills globally, anywhere in the world. And so as I go around, I see lots of examples of this. I see people working for a San Jose IT firm living in southern Utah. They don't need to be in San Jose on a daily basis, so they can spend their time living in a more amenity-based community without the traffic and the pollution and all kinds of other things. And so, and as talked about, there's lots of people that want to go home. And the only reason keeping them from going home is a lack of jobs. And it's going to require different skills. It's going to require better, improved broadband in a lot of cases. But I think there's lots of opportunities for that. Okay. Already said this, so let's go on to the next one. And the rural communities that I see that are thriving, that are economically and demographically are thriving, are those that are starting to make the transition. And a lot of times these aren't the communities that have access to really high-end types of amenities. They're communities that recognize that the coal industry or the logging industry isn't coming back, and they're working to make the change, to help their workforce have the skills, to have the technology, and to attract the kind of people that want to live in that kind of community and can make it into the future. Okay, so that is mine. My job is to introduce the next speaker, and in my running around, I forgot, and so I appreciate Jennifer for pulling this up so I can do it. The next speaker is Jennifer Lever. She's a senior tourism analyst at the Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah. She does statewide tourism research. She's the author of the annual State of Utah's Travel and Tourism Industry Report, and all 29 counties of Utah, their tourism profiles. And she's conducted a lot of economic research for the Film Commission. And so she received her BA in English from the University of Puget Sound and her MA from Oregon State University. So Jennifer, thank you.
As a state travel and tourism analyst, I spend a lot of time looking at who comes to Utah, how much money they're spending, what they're spending their money on, and how that filters through the economy to support jobs and businesses and generate tax revenue. In 2017, there was a record over $9 billion in visitor spending, which generated over $1 billion in state and local tax revenue and supported over 140,000 jobs. We like to say that in Utah, 1 in 10 jobs is supported somehow by the travel and tourism industry. Visitor spending has been increasing with record levels every year. Over the past 5 years, it's increased 16%. And a lot of visitors come to visit our national parks and monuments. And as you can see, over 30 years, visitation to the parks has increased significantly, particularly over the past 5 years, nearly doubling. So I'm going to talk about coal country today, but to put it into some context, I've created a region that I'm calling Canyon Country, which is made up of 5 rural counties in southeastern Utah. And these are all natural amenity type communities, mostly, except San Juan isn't maybe quite gotten there at this point. But this is where, the reason I'm comparing Canyon Country to coal country is because they have a similar population and similar number of jobs. So looking at that, I think it's a fair comparison. So in the Canyon Country region, that's where all 5 national parks are located, as well as 7 national monuments. In 2017, this region received almost $500 million in leisure and hospitality sales. That's basically spending on arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodations, and food services. In Coal Country, which is Carbon and Emery counties, they received about $50 million, or about 1/10 of what Canyon Country received in these types of sales. And in Utah, there are state and local sales taxes. So when people spend money in these areas, it generates tax revenue. In 2017, Canyon Country, the spending in leisure and hospitality generated around $32 million in local tax revenue. And in comparison, Coal Country, their sales generated $2 million, so quite a big difference. And this is money that goes back to the counties and cities that they can use. So now I'm going to talk about jobs. I'm going to look at the leisure and hospitality sector and compare it to the natural resource mining sector. And there's some interesting things. In Canyon Country, for the past 30 years, the total share of jobs in leisure and hospitality was right around 15% in 1990. And today it's 43%, which is almost like 1 out of every 2 jobs is in travel and tourism. In Coal Country, not much has changed in 30 years. The share of leisure and hospitality jobs is just right around 10, 11, 12%, and has remained there. The opposite is true when we look at the mining and natural resources jobs. In Canyon Country, it's just sort of hovered around 4% for 30 years. But in Coal Country, it has been on a steep decline from 27% down to 13%. Same goes for population. In 1990, both regions had the same exact population, but in Canyon Country, it's increased over time, and in Coal Country, it has remained rather flat and even started declining from 8 years ago. The population is decreasing. So why focus on Coal Country? At the Gardner Policy Institute, we're looking at this region in particular for many reasons. The economy has been contracting over the past 10 years. There's high unemployment and high poverty, net outmigration, housing price depreciation, and an opioid crisis. And what is meant by the opioid crisis is there's actually more opioid prescriptions in Coal Country than actual people. It's pretty depressing. So is it time for Coal Country to embrace the visitor economy? It's just a question. They may not be. Looking at natural amenities or recreational assets in this region, currently there are 5 state parks here, including Goblin Valley, which is one of the top 10 Utah state parks. They receive about 250,000 visits a year at Goblin Valley. I've also highlighted some areas of interest, which include the San Rafael Swell, and to the south there and to the north, 9 Mile Canyon. 9 Mile Canyon has been referred to the world's longest art gallery. It's, I think, 40-something miles of Native American rock art along a canyon. And then finally, about a few weeks ago, President Trump signed the Public Lands Bill, which sets aside some wilderness in this region, as well as recommends the designation of a new national monument, which would be called Jurassic National Monument. So they will probably be getting a new national monument. Okay, so this is the more fun part of my presentation. Got through the numbers. Last fall, I had the opportunity to go to the Coal Country area a couple times, see what they're doing down there as far as promoting a visitor economy, and talk to some local people. And I just wanted to share with you a couple of case studies. So Helper, Utah, it's located in the northwest corner of Carbon County. Again, talk about Helper and Orangeville. Helper, in the late 1800s, Helper was known as like a railroad economy. And then around World War II, it became more of a coal mining community. And both of these sectors attracted a lot of immigrants. So it was a very ethnically diverse town at one point. I think in 1920, they said that 27 foreign languages were spoken on the streets of Helper. And as you can see, looking up Main Street, not a lot has changed to the buildings. They almost look like they're right out of the late 1800s, early 1900s, which gives it a very historic appeal. In 2018, Helper elected a new mayor, Mayor Leslie Peterman, I believe. One of her goals for Helper is to revitalize the main street and revitalize the town. So she put together a revitalization committee whose goal is to create a vibrant and beautiful city respectful of our heritage with community direction to attract tourists, increase economic activity, and bolster local pride. So part of what they've been doing is the community members have come together to beautify the streets. They've put together these really attractive benches and planted trees, focused a lot on painting the outside of businesses, putting tables and chairs, just really enhancing the curb appeal. This is the old Conoco gas station, which I believe a private investor purchased and then completely renovated. It's gorgeous. If you're ever in Helper, it's at the south end of Main Street. I highly recommend checking it out. But Helper is also becoming known as an artist community. About 10 years ago, a U of U art professor named David Dornan relocated from Salt Lake City to Helper because he liked the quality of life and the quiet, and he could, work on his art there. And subsequently, he attracted additional artists that have relocated there. And many of them are purchasing up the historic storefronts. And what they'll do is they'll turn the back into some kind of art studio, and the front is a showroom or gallery. So when I was there, I talked to Kathleen Royster, who does ceramic art. She was great. She told me about all the new artists that are coming to town. And she basically has a wheel and makes her ceramics in the back room, and then she displays it in the front. And she said she sells most of her art all across the world and all across the nation. So also Helper's doing a lot of art walks and art festivals, film screenings. They're really just making an effort to attract people. In addition, this is the Helper Trails and Recreation Committee. They're out looking for new biking trails, hiking trails, maybe big boulders to climb on, and I have to hurry through this. So it's a good balance for, maybe you spend a morning on Main Street and then you go out biking or hiking. Okay, I gotta hurry through this. Orangeville is an agricultural town. It's really close to Joe's Valley Reservoir, beautiful reservoir. The stream flows from the reservoir down through town. And there are these incredible huge rocks on the side of the stream. So many climbers have found that these rocks are fun to boulder on, which is climbing a 10 to 15 foot rock without a rope and working on climbing problems. Over 10 years, the popularity of this area has exploded for this bouldering community. They've even designated a bouldering area. And I definitely want to talk about the Joe's Valley Bouldering Festival. This started 5 years ago between two climbers from Salt Lake City and a couple of local Emery County residents. And they joined forces to come up with something that would bring the locals together with the climbers. They wanted everyone to come together for a common cause. So I got to go last fall, and I was really impressed by what they've done.
I won't read the mission statement, but the 5th one is coming up this year. Every year that tracks more people. I think last year was 400 attendees. I thought this was interesting to see. The festival's held at the Emery County Rodeo Grounds, and you can see all the climbers in their nice north face tents. They're just camped all over the lawn of the rodeo grounds. It's a good contrast in what they've put together. Here's a climber being pulled by a local cowboy. The festival opens with cowboy games, and the climbers get to do bull riding, hide pulling, and chicken chases. It's a blast. So the locals will teach the climbers new skills. Part of the festival is attracting the local businesses to come in and cater the food. Also they have the local business owners hold workshops, maybe on candy making, pizza making, how to make beef jerky. And the climbers also hold workshops to teach the locals new skills. And I don't know if you can see, but this woman climbing here, or bouldering, is Miss Emery 2017, I think. So she's learning how to boulder in her backyard. They do yoga, photography. Okay, really quick, I want to talk about Doug and Cammie Stilson. They're Orangeville residents. They both have family that worked in coal mining industry, fathers, grandfathers. Actually, Doug works, going back to what Kirk was talking about, the broadband. He's in the broadband industry down there. Anyway, they live on the road that is where all the climbers go to go bouldering. And they just saw this influx of people. And what they heard was that none of these climbers could find a good cup of coffee. And so Doug and Cammie, being an LDS couple, they didn't drink coffee, they didn't know how to make coffee, but they saw the business opportunity. So they went out and they learned everything that they could about how to make a cappuccino or a latte, and they essentially opened a coffee shop in their home. It's called Cup of Joe's, and it has just become a cultural or a subcultural phenomenon down there. Here's what used to be their family room. It's now a coffee shop. When I was there was a constant stream of people, and I would say half of the people coming in were speaking foreign languages. And here's the other side of the window where they serve the coffee, which is actually their kitchen. Cammie's making coffee, Doug's taking orders. And those large boxes that you see have bouldering pads in them. Those are the big, large pads the climbers put at the bottom when they boulder in case they fall. They're huge, they're cumbersome, nobody wants to travel with them, so they saw another business opportunity and they started renting out bouldering pads. And it's been very successful as well. So now the climbers don't have to lug those things around with them. And in fact, Doug was going to order more this season. He said it had been going so well. So that was just a real entrepreneurial story of, some things people are doing. Really quick, how can coal country bolster its visitor economy? Through tourism taxes, lodging tax, resort community sales tax. Utah has an array of tourism-related taxes. State funding, the Utah Office of Tourism and the Utah Office of Outdoor Rec offer different kinds of grants, matching grants. Tourism Office offers money for marketing, and the Recreation Office offers money for infrastructure. There's also some federal funding out there, if you look hard enough. Private-public partnerships, again, local business owners matching funds with local municipalities and coming together to make something that will attract people. Local newcomer partnerships like the Joes Valley Bouldering Festival, and policy changes and introducing legislation that would help this specific area, or an area like this that wants to go that way. So, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Megan Nelson. Megan is the External Affairs Associate for the Utah chapter of the Nature Conservancy. She has worked on Western natural resource, environmental, and public land issues for over 10 years as an attorney, environmental planner, and public lands consultant. In her current role, she develops partnerships with relevant agencies, conservation organizations, and private entities, and works on state and national policy to conserve the lands, the lands and waters on which all life depends. Before joining the Conservancy, Megan developed federal land management plans, facilitated planning efforts, authored federal legislation, managed NEPA for federal agencies, and advocated for conservation. Throughout her career, she has most enjoyed collaboration and working closely with diverse groups to find common ground. Megan holds a Juris Doctor in Natural Resources Law and Policy Certificate from the University of Colorado Law School. She is a 7th-generation Utahn and always feels a little off if she can't see mountains. Megan.
Okay, so these two have keyed me up really well today. Don started out with kind of regional, west-wide, got into the state. Jennifer continued that statewide to kind of local level, and I'm going to take it all the way down to a specific farm. So this is my hometown, Midway, Utah. I picked my title today, Amenity Migration Squared, because I am Amenity Migrant Squared. My parents moved here in the mid-'70s to get out of the valley and live up in rural Utah. And so I am a second-generation migrant. So I, as Jennifer explained, have a planning background. So I see everything through that kind of geeky focus. And with a shift in economy and demographics, they bring kind of 4 big changes to a community. One is more money, either for a tax base, just through tourism, through shifting in industry, new industries, new opportunities, as well. And then finally, new viewpoints, and that's new people moving to these areas or visiting these areas. And kind of the nexus of all this, and if it works or doesn't work, as far as I'm concerned, is planning. So to return to my home, yes, it always is like this at night, every day. To put it into context to those who are not familiar where Midway is, the upper left corner is Park City, and this basin right here, is Midway. So if you just hop over that mountain, you're in my valley. So Midway was founded by Swiss Mormons, and it was a dominantly dairy farming community, and had been for many, many years. Currently, there's about 4,500 residents, and it is in the 4th fastest growing county in the nation. Sometimes we hit up to 3rd, but it hangs around 4th most of the time. One of the cool things about Midway is our forefathers had very good foresight. And so, unlike a lot of communities, we have a totally protected viewshed. So kind of the foothills you see are all state parkland, and that was mostly done through a private partner and public partnership, including the Nature Conservancy. So those lands are all state parklands, open for recreation and use, and then the upper kind of viewshed lands are all Forest Service. So thankfully, it will look like that way forever. But it puts a great demand on the land in town. And what, previously we had kind of 3 big zones. There was agricultural zones, there was residential zones, and there was a tiny little commercial zone. So as soon as people like my parents started moving there and visitors started coming, that wasn't going to carry forth very far. So this is the town of Midway I grew up in. Not the most inviting, but very cute nonetheless. In about the mid-2000s, Midway started kind of a self-assessment. They saw what was coming, and they wanted to figure out how to plan ahead. So they had first more money. They had a growing tax base. There were more people coming. There was more affluent people coming. So then the spending money in the communities. And then we had a huge second home boom. And up to a certain degree, towns love that because they pay high taxes and use very few services. So it means the town has a lot of expendable money. New industry. As I said, agriculture was the dominant industry in town. It was a legitimate excuse for me in high school to say the Propes were moving the cattle to the south pasture, and I'm late. There's nothing I can do about it. So that began to change when dairy farms started closing down or getting in a smaller scale. And then tourism started growing. Park City started sending some of their overload over to us. It's a good day trip from Park City, and then the locals in the Salt Lake Valley realized it was an easy drive, and they could also spend the day up there. More options. As I said, Midway realized this was an opportunity to kind of assess the future and drive what they wanted it to look like. And then there was also a support growing amongst the locals that had been there for multiple generations and also the people moving there, that we need to preserve what we have. It's why people are coming here, but it's also why people stay here. And then finally, all the new viewpoints. So retirees are probably the highest group that's moving in. So they are financially stable, they like to be involved in things, and they have money. So they're also really good residents to move in. We had a lot of out-of-state people. You can sell your home in California, and as Park City knows, you can buy an even bigger home here. And for the second time, we're getting amenity migration squared. People that moved to Park City are now moving in hordes to Midway because Park City is getting too big. And so these are kind of the concerns that are overlying all this. Park City pressure. So there is a huge problem now in Wasatch County, which Midway is in, that we house a lot of the service workers for Park City. And so there's a housing problem, there's an affordability problem, there's a transportation problem, there's a mountain pass you have to get through between the two. There's a capacity problem as well in the town. Since we're limited by size and scope for expansion, we don't have the infrastructure to hold all these new people or visitors possibly. And then we also have a very small town government. Park City has 11 planners that are full-time. Midway has 1, so he is very stressed all the time, but he's doing a really good job. Major developments. So most of the development in Midway had to be on ag lands because that's the only lands that are available. So before a lot of these planning changes got put in, huge developments were proposed, and now there's kind of disorganized communities that have developed within the town. And finally, Old Town versus New Town. I'm not going to touch on this next because I think it's the next panel. But people like me are torn both ways. There was a Midway from when I was little that I love and I will hold on to, but I know it can only be there if these new people are coming in. And so that's a battle that's also being worked out. But Midway's doing a pretty good job of working through it. So I just want to highlight a couple of the ways that they're using planning to solve these problems. First is an open space bond. This was actually passed just last year, $5 million, which is a big chunk of money, and it will be good because it will help agriculture. One of the requirements was it's no fee title, so it is all going to be conservation easements, and they're specifically targeting active agricultural lands. So this will allow farmers who have been operating for a very long time to continue to do that, keep open space for the community, keep money in the community. And then focus on the in-town land, because that's really the only option we have for open space. And Wasatch County also passed a bond, so there's a chance they could be leveraged together. The Wasatch County bond was for $10 million, so most of the open space is on the Midway side, which is nice. They have been continually kind of working on zoning revisions. I think one thing that I kind of harp on a little about when I'm on my planning soapbox is those are not final documents. They need to always be modified. You have a 20-year goal, but you're always working on your 5-year plan, and you always keep them moving. So they've done really interesting things with the zoning code. They went from having those 3 to I think there's 18 now that focus on everything from density to semi-commercial to what type of agriculture business. This allows you to actively manage growth. And then also, in conjunction with this, because our town has a lot of money from these things, we have a lot of amenities. So there's a lot of bike paths that they developed to make things interconnected. And then they're working on things that will help residents feel that their taxes and kind of the burden they're feeling with these people coming in is actually paying off. And then targeted tourism. So instead of trying to get people to come and stay multiple days in Midway, Midway is really trying to focus on getting day visitation. So people from Park City or people from Salt Lake coming to visit. So come, play, and then go sleep somewhere else. Restaurants are also developing, and that's good because it's hand in hand with the new locals that are moving there. They have kind of a higher expectation of food and what's available. So the much loved temp freeze was not enough. So now we have upgraded to gourmet food trucks. And finally, recreation. as I'm sure many of you are aware, we're between two big lakes. We have golf courses. We have mountain biking trails everywhere. And so that's a good thing to bring people in during the day, but also sleep somewhere else at night. So the new kind of slogan is Midway Mountain Village, and it's much more inviting. So to finish this off, we're going to get down to the farm level. I grew up with these families. Many of them have been there for over 100 years and passed from generation to generation to generation. A lot of them were huge scale at one point, thousands of head of cattle, hundreds of acres of agriculture lands, and that started changing. As I mentioned earlier, the demand for land to develop housing really was placed on agricultural lands. That was all that was available. The next generation, including my generation, either didn't want to farm or they couldn't afford to live there and work on the farm with what they were being paid. So they had to leave the valley. New neighbors. People come visit, they see the cows, they love it, they move there, they smell cows in the morning, and suddenly it's not quite as appealing. So city council meetings got pretty heated sometimes, but always interesting. And then finally, the farmers themselves, you know the phrase, paper rich, cash poor. So to keep their businesses viable with the upgrades necessary or changing, their practices, they need a lot of cash flow, and that just wasn't coming. So I have two scenarios that kind of represent the pre and post planning overhaul. The first one is he was a former president of the Dairy Council, and none of his kids wanted to continue farming. So he knew he had to sell his land, and he was trying to work with potential buyers to find something that would be semi-agricultural to keep the land in operation and not allow it to be a huge new subdivision development. Well, he found a great buyer who, and I still don't totally understand this, but they grow vegetables in a closed hydro system with fish. It sounds crazy, but it's kind of cool. But the zoning wouldn't allow for it because it wasn't technically agriculture, it was commercial under the code. So in the end, he ended up selling his land to a large developer and it just became a subdivision. Of course, his neighbors at the time thought this was great because now they get rid of those damn cows and they're gonna be gone, but now they can't see Temp. They just see houses. So the other option, a half-mile down the road is another family farm. And they, I think, are the oldest one in the valley. They claim that, so I'm going to give it to them. And they had a son who went to USU and participated in the experimental learning program there for agriculture and came home to his dad and said, I've got an idea. We want to keep the farm, but we can't afford it. So they sold part of their property to be a small development, used income and including a grant from Utah State, developed a cheese factory. And now they are an artisan cheese company. And if you've ever been to Midway, it's that gorgeous red barn when you drive in. So they reduced the size of their herd a little bit, but they have a financially booming business. They're a tourist attraction for the town, which everybody loves. And of course, the Park City people love and get their cheese that's from the cows, you can see in the fields. So it was a huge success. So I just want to reiterate the importance of planning and all this efforts. It can make things go one or two ways, and it's a lot of work, and it can be very frustrating. But it brings a lot of people together, and when you have money combined with that, it can be very powerful. So thank you. And I will turn it back over to Pat.
That mountain in the background is Mount Timpanogos, and when I was a kid growing up, my Mormon grandmother told me that it was an image of an Indian maiden who jumped off a cliff because her father wouldn't let her marry a member of another tribe. So there are some things that go beyond present generations in terms of different problems. I want to now take questions, and would please wait until you get the microphone, because we're recording these sessions for the edification of people at Stanford and elsewhere. But I want to pose one question to Jennifer, and I think you might have a response as well. The numbers on tourism versus the coal were quite dramatic, but I would want to know about what I would call migrating dollars, in the sense that there are new infrastructures being put in place, but the revenue that might make a difference for the community often migrates to one of the coastal areas because those who are the investors, they're not leaving the money in the community, so to speak. What's your suggestion on how that might be remedied?
Well, I think that you'd want to see more local people seizing the opportunity to benefit from more visitors coming, and maybe, some Price residents trying to open a restaurant in Helper, or trying to keep the money in the local community, because there are outside investors. Maybe I heard Japan investors were looking at one of the spots on Helper Main Street, and some people from California, I'm sure. But I think that the visitor economy can open up a lot of entrepreneurial type opportunities. So I think it would just be maybe like teaching and educating locals on, hey, you can do this. Here's some skills to run a business. And so I think that would be the key to keeping the money inside.
Megan, do you have any suggestions?
I think part of it is diversifying the economy, and maybe not just replacing a one for one, but a one for many. And that's not only good to keep money in the community, but also to get that longevity. Because, maybe tourism one day won't be the booming thing. I mean, it probably will, but there's a chance it couldn't. And so not thinking you have found the golden solution, but always kind of pushing it out there. And maybe there's an even better one to the one you have. And kind of if you keep that focus of keeping it broad, then the money isn't directed just in one direction. It's kind of a scatter shot.
Don?
I got an economist friend at Utah State who, Jennifer mentioned the San Rafael Swell in Emery County. Him and his wife went there and camped for a weekend, and he kept track of his expenditures. And he spent $2.50 in Emery County, and he spent lots and lots of money in Cache County, where he bought his supplies and everything else. He bought a bottle of water. Part of it was they didn't have any artisan cheese places, and they didn't go to Joe's Cup of Joe's, and so part of it is the community building the infrastructure so that there is somewhere to spend money. But also, I think there's other more basic questions that we need to think about when we're doing this to enhance the economy of rural communities.
Yeah. In Utah politics, the third rail is the T word for tax. If anybody has the temerity in the legislature to suggest some new taxing revenue source, usually they find their way out of the Capitol on the back of a rail and dumped into City Creek Canyon. But I would suggest, and I'd be interested in the city or the audience's reaction to this, is that you're going to have to start having tax benefits for agricultural activities if they're going to be sustainable. And I don't mean growing alfalfa in a desert, but growing other more sustainable and marketable crops. But any reaction to that notion?
So I always think about water in terms of that. And, the only thing more rare in Utah besides getting new taxes is water. And so I think as far as, new crops, one big concern needs to be the water that's used for them, because that's the biggest use in the state.
And I think you're absolutely right. And going back to the example Megan gave, and I grew up on a farm that grew alfalfa. We fed, and we grew other things. Would send them over a mountain, and we were trying to compete in an economy that we couldn't compete in, and so we were poor farmers that went out of business. I think instead of spending your money on a commodity that you're competing with everybody else, why not do some artisan cheese, or why not do something that's you can brand as locally produced and has a lot more potential of making money. I grew up in Wayne County. There's some Wayne County people here. I got a friend that makes fruit pies that he sells to the Park Service in Capitol Reef National Park, and he's making money doing that rather than trying to grow alfalfa, like you say.
Right. Questions from the audience? Let's get, just.
Hi, this question is for Don. Several months ago, I learned about the Rural Online Initiative. I don't know how long that program's been in effect. Obviously, you're aware of it. Can you give us a little bit of, you know about it. Tell me how long that's been going on and what's the acceptance of it in the small rural communities?
Okay, the Rural Online Initiative was passed last year, 2018, by the Utah State Legislature. It provided $2.3 million that's funneled through Utah State University Extension. The purpose of these funds is to, most of the money has gone to hire 4 individuals. Each of them have a region of southern Utah. Their job is to, number one, help people become aware of opportunities to make money in the gig economy or using the internet. And number 2 is to provide these individuals training so that they can do it effectively. And so this is the second year of a 3-year thing. A little chunk of the money goes to my office where we're conducting research on the economic feasibility of this as a way of, as a rural economic development tool. So far, I'm really impressed with the work that's going on and the outcomes that are happening out there.
Is it being received pretty well?
Yes, very, very well.
I do want to introduce Tia, who's over here, who's a senior at Stanford, a wonderful, wonderful person, and it's just, I think, a great example of what great universities like the University of Utah or Stanford can produce. So, Tia, congratulations. Other questions? Bruce?
So a couple of you mentioned retirees. So I have a couple, sort of want to develop that topic. First of all, is Utah higher or lower than other states in the number of retirees that it's attracted? Secondly, what is it that the retirees are looking for? Is it all about this sort of lower cost of homes, which I think somebody mentioned? But to what extent, because we've been doing some work with Utah on healthcare, and it strikes me that the healthcare system here is quite good, and they've thought a lot about delivery of healthcare services in remote areas. To what extent does the quality of Utah's healthcare system, is that contributing also to the retiree movement into Utah?
I personally don't know. There's actually a healthcare expert that works in my office and sits right next to me. I wish she was here right now. I do, just kind of a little bit related is we've been looking closely at Washington County lately. There are a lot of retirees moving to that county, and the numbers are really staggering. So that could play into it. I don't know if you guys know.
Yeah, I was going to mention Washington County and also the Wasatch Back where we are right now, because it is so close to Salt Lake, and Salt Lake has such a huge healthcare industry, including the Huntsman Cancer Institute and all those kind of places. A lot of people can live the rural lifestyle but have the urban accessibility, and so that's why the Wasatch Back is exploding a lot right now. Because it is a concern, now they're healthy and they're out playing, but thinking long term if I'm going to move there permanently in 10, 15 years. And Park City just got a new hospital. I don't know which way you came in, but you drive by it on the way, and I'm having surgery there next week, so I highly recommend it.
I'd also like to answer that question in an indirect way. We have Silicon Slope in the southern part of Salt Lake County and then most of northern Utah County. That's booming. But also I think something that is one of my frustrations is Utah is one of the leading human genetics institutes in the world. We have the largest genetic collection of genealogy records. The Eccles family has donated an incredible library and to the human genetics department there. And as we go into modern medicine, I think there are going to be extraordinary opportunities to use the data that's here to develop healthcare solutions, including cancer questions, that simply would not be possible but for the synergism that's been created at the University of Utah, BYU, Utah State. Other questions? Yes.
I'd like to ask Don to give some examples about some of the communities or counties that you see successfully making a transition? It doesn't have to be from mining to tourism, just the way they're going and the process they use. And it's kind of following up on what Megan and Jennifer said, one from the community level, one from a specific business. But give us some examples of why things are working and how they're working.
Okay. You know, the easy one would be to look at some of the amenity communities, and those near, like Park City is easy. You know, it's near a city, they have the amenities. And so the fact that this place is booming is no surprise. Okay, we spent some time in Moab, for example. I think they started as an amenity boomtown kind of thing, and then they run into the struggles that many amenity communities face. They were creating a lot of low-income, seasonal jobs, and so they have been working with some success. I think they haven't totally dealt with it, of trying to create, and some of this is using the internet to, creative people can market their products all over the world, but trying to create the kind of jobs that are year-round and can support a family and are permanent residents and those kinds of things. I was in 2 communities in Colorado last week. One of them is doing, they're not more than 30 or 40 miles apart. One of them is doing very well, and the other one is really, really struggling. Part of it is in their mind, they haven't made the transition to the fact that the old economy is not coming back, and they need to think differently. But part of it is one of them is also closer to Vail and Aspen, and it's become kind of a bedroom community for those places. So again, you know, the advantage of location gives them an advantage. But yeah, and there's others where they just have, in their mind, they recognize that the economy of the 1960s is gone. It's not coming back, and so they're going forward and trying to find other things.
Let me also add to that, if I might, and I simply pinpoint the counties where the sheriff has threatened to arrest me as a lawyer. Certainly among my favorite ones are Garfield, San Juan, Uintah, Duchesne, where the constitutional sheriff notion that they are the law of the land, that they do not have to pay attention to the federal constitution, and that what their word goes. And I think that creates a reaction for people, whether they're tourists and they get a ticket and are treated in a rather abrupt way, or when I was with BLM, if I went into some of these counties, they had to have security people go with me because, again, there was this us and them. And I do take credit for being the first person to want to sue Mr. Bundy, but Bruce Babbitt didn't want to do that because all the problems that would result. Yeah, Don.
I think this is, I'm glad you brought this up. This is an important point. The communities I see doing well are, they recognize and embrace diversity. You know, that they will accept people from Asia or Europe or African Americans or sexual orientation or whatever, versus the kind of communities you're talking about where, yeah, if
well, no, Emery County, where my mother's family's from, I used to regularly get invited to the Kilpack and the Leonard reunion, and ever since I was with BLM, I just haven't gotten an invitation. You know, not sure why. Mike, wait until you get the mic.
It seems to me one of the big issues, and I've lived here for close to 30 years, is employee housing. I mean, as all these areas have prospered, the problem is the people that work here and service all these beautiful homes and restaurants and other things we love can't afford to live here, and they get further and further out. So if we don't change codes and planning vehicles, we're going to have a real problem. And I don't know if somebody could comment on that and what we can do, and even the kind of ways in which you look at housing and structure housing. And there's a lot of interesting technologies applied to sort of very efficient kind of things, but it doesn't meet codes. It doesn't meet the aesthetic kind of things. So things have to change, because I think we're just going to, unless we start cleaning our own toilets, it's just not going to, it's not sustainable with what's happening here.
Yeah, I just want to say I was in Moab a couple weeks ago. I actually lived in Moab for 3 years in the early 90s, right, as tourism was really starting to boom. They were getting the second or first big hotel and, second fast food restaurant, and everyone was freaking out because, and even back then, housing was a problem. And it's now an even greater problem. So when I was there a couple weeks ago, I was talking to the owner of a mountain bike shuttle company who started a business there. He's been there 20 years. And he said, these are employees. We have people that want to come, but there's nowhere to live. So what their solution is that his company, they actually just started buying Moab houses and putting their employees in them and having them pay them rent. And so that might be one option, is just, it's part of the employer package. You'll have a place to sleep, you'll have a home when you come work for us.
I know a lot of the ski resorts here do that, and that's part of some of the housing in Wasatch County. As far as planning and zoning, I think density is a big one. In a lot of these kind of amenity communities, the big house or the big lawn is very popular, but that is not great when you're trying to get affordable housing. And so allowing for those areas with more density that still have the aesthetic and the codes to meet is important. As well, I think more and more, and I believe there's a state requirement too, that cities of a certain class have to have so much affordable housing, and so a consideration could be made. Maybe all cities, not just cities of third class and above or below, need to have that, because you can't grow without it. That'd be a legislative decision, but I think it could be something to move that forward and make it a priority in places that aren't facing that now, but could be.
All right, I've given you the Shea investment principle. I want to mention two other Shea principles. One's a political one that works quite well in Utah, and that is, if you succeed, you get full credit. If there's a problem or a mistake, it's my fault. So you're free to use that anytime. The other is a Shea conference principle, that if you sit and the blood drains to your behind, you need to get up and circulate. So I'd like to take one more question and then let everybody mingle about. Felicity?
Thanks, Pat. A very quick question for Megan that is perhaps not as serious as it should be, and then a serious question for Don. When you showed the artisanal cheese place, the other place that turned into suburban development was in part because nobody liked the smell of cows. The artisanal cheese place, they had a small subdivision which paid for them to create an artisanal cheese place. What did the people in that subdivision think about the smell of cows? So they, I think, still hate it. It still comes up at many city council meetings. To that point, the cheese factory has a requirement that they use one of their gates to move cows and not the other one in front of that subdivision. So it's not a problem that is completely solved, but maybe we're getting there. And Don, on another subject entirely, and if I'm repeating something that happened at lunch, forgive me, but you talk about upgrading internet and broadband in rural communities to create new opportunities. How many broadband providers are there who are willing to spend the money to run lines or create a tower in a community with very few people?
Well, this is a huge problem. They're not willing to, and the law states that there has to be a certain level, and so they'll send their guy out there and say, yes, there's internet in this community, but if you try to, I recently hired a person in Panguitch, Utah, to help me on a project, and to be paid by Utah State University, she had to fill out the job application and submit it. She couldn't do it in Panguitch. There wasn't enough broadband to submit a job application. So, and they tell you that there's internet there, but there isn't. It's pretty bad.
Yeah,
so I think this is a big problem that we need to deal. We dealt with it in the 30s. We could deal with it now if we put our resources and mind to it.
I want to pivot off that and recommend David Kennedy's new book called Freedom from Fear, because it tracks 1929 to 1945 and does a very good job of how housing problems, communication problems, rural electrification, how it was dealt with, and how Mariner Eccles was a key to making sure that that was properly funded. So when I was director of BLM, I had this wonderful idea that everywhere there was BLM land, we would put up towers so that it would service rural America. And guess what I had happen? All the lobbyists for the private companies came in, and I was just, hounded to death and was not able to do it. I got more calls on that than I did actually on wild horses. So I would encourage you during this break to meet somebody that you haven't talked to, and we'll get back together at 3. Thank you.
It worked out well.